Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Buy Box podcast. I'm here with Laura Artigas, who we go way back together. Laura and I, we first crossed paths when we were both at J&J Consumer on the medical device side in the diabetes sector. Since then, Laura has had the most incredible career path and really has lived into this chief commercial officer lane, advising multiple brands, several companies in the consumer healthcare space. And so, what I love about your experience, Laura, is working with a variety of companies at all stages of growth. Some in a plateau, some that need a turnaround, some that need a boost. And so, through that, as a brand and a business builder, excited to dive in, hear of your experiences, and help our community just learn from some of your tips and tricks and how you hold on to control of brands that you've touched over time.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I always love to ask our guests, as you think about in the digital kind of commerce landscape, this sort of arena of chaos and challenge. I'd love to hear any experiences that come top of mind for you where you were working in a business and it was hit by a marketplace challenge. What did you do? What was the situation? What was the challenge? And maybe take us through any scenarios that you can think of.
Yeah, sure. Well, my more recent experience, certainly not from Johnson & Johnson, but more recent experience was with brands that were newer to marketplaces, either launching them from scratch or moving them from a pure direct-to-consumer model into more of an omni-channel distribution. So the first example that came to mind was a recent brand I worked on had been majority direct to consumer and had built up a pretty nice Amazon business. Great news, got distribution at Walmart. And so now there was a bit more channel potential conflict because the price at Walmart was different for this particular item than it was on the direct to consumer site and Amazon. And so a solution was already in place to solve for this, and that was getting a different count in place for Amazon so that there wasn't a direct one-to-one comparison, because those algorithms are constantly checking price and checking count. And so there was a different count on the way from supply chain. And 3 weeks before the ship date to Walmart, Walmart.com went ahead and changed their price to match their in-store price, even though product wasn't there yet and it wasn't on shelf. And it was 3 weeks before the reset date. So this was kind of a 3-week hiccup where all of a sudden we lost the buy box on Amazon because there was now a more competitive price on Walmart.com. So the Amazon price went down, and we had about 3 weeks of pain until we were able to receive that inventory. And so some of the lessons learned are just be ready farther in advance with your different inventory. It was the right strategy to have a different SKU on Amazon, a different count. We just got surprised. Like, when are retailers ever early? But in this case, Walmart was on top of it and had changed their .com price. Also, we learned that Amazon receiving inventory is taking a lot longer. That may persist as supply chain doesn't seem to be settling down anytime soon. They also have opened so many more DCs in order to offer that Prime Day promise on more items. So that booking in inventory into Amazon, it's just taking a lot longer.
It's a really good example. And especially in the wider that your offering becomes available to different shoppers and different channels, the level of complexity increases. And I think something that you just said, that even the best laid out strategy, there are always surprises. I'm curious in this one, how did the business and just cross-functional partners sort of react in that time of the surprise? Especially, 3 weeks can feel like a very long time when you're trying to just get pricing algorithms to match the appropriate kind of pricing and SKUs. What were some of the things as a leader that you had to navigate in that particular situation with the team?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to have people that are ready to surface issues and not hide them. And different cultures and different organizations, that's not always the case. And so fortunately, there was very much the case in this organization that you wouldn't be penalized for like bringing bad news to the boss. I mean, we all needed to be all hands on deck to help solve this. So we had people that were constantly on our own team, just watching and monitoring, which was also a blessing because we saw it right away that we'd lost the buy box. It's not like you get notified exactly. You just kind of see your sales start to decrease as soon as you check. So We learned of it right away because we had someone in our inventory planning team that was watching. And so then it was an all hands on deck to find a solution, which is the great thing about smaller organizations is yes, everyone has their job description in their lane, but it's expected that people throw on different hats and roll up their sleeves and help out wherever they can, not kind of stay in a confined box. So at that moment, the solution was to simply drop our price to match. So, we did that. We had keys to log in and, obviously we're the admin as the owner. And so we dropped the price, but that solution came about because of some really quick iteration and discussion among the leadership, but also among the working team. What options are there? And there really aren't that many. And so we came to that solution pretty quickly and acted on it pretty quickly. But we still had several weeks of pain. And so then became a forecasting exercise of how painful do we think it's going to get in kind of a best, middle, and worst case scenario.
I can appreciate the ability to work swiftly with agility in a smaller kind of organizational setup. I'm curious, we often hear a lot of, this is what happened in terms of success, but then there's the all other. I'm sure many kind of battle wounds, and especially in navigating how to build a brand, get the right kind of consumer experience based on plans. I would love to hear any stories that you may have where things didn't quite go as successfully as you maybe had envisioned or imagined. Tell us about that, and reflection. What would you have tried differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. One that comes to mind with startups, you think you have an idea that will solve a marketplace challenge, but as many people know, startups pivot many times, often in those early days, and those pivots come because things don't turn out as you had planned. And so one that really comes to mind was I helped start an incubator. It was not a venture-backed company. It was a kind of entrepreneurial endeavor instead of a large multinational public company. And the thesis was that we would be able to really tap into the promise of personalization for consumers, particularly around supplements. And the promise sounds terrific, right? Like every body literally has different nutritional needs. You can take identical twins and they have different nutritional needs. And there are gaps based on environment and lifestyle that can exacerbate those genetic differences. So the promise sounds terrific. Personalization for every body. However, what we learned was that the demand for personalization, consumers actually wanting something that's hyper personalized to their body, is very niche. There are people who really appreciate the benefits of personalization in supplements and other products. They tend to be those high performance athletes, people who run Ironman competitions, right? They can see every tiny little nuanced difference in their training performance based on how they slept, how they ate, what they ate, right? They really, really can appreciate a personalized regimen. Outside of that core group of super users, personalization to kind of the masses, there's just not much demand there. And combined with that demand shortage, it's very expensive to deliver, if you can imagine. You need some kind of diagnostic in whatever area you're looking for, some usually biomarker, saliva, blood, something, maybe multiple, to really understand the makeup of the body. And then you have to have that delivery mechanism to actually personalize the product. There are manufacturers out there that can do that, but then you have to kind of explain it as well. And so we had this cool model that offered that diagnostic readout of biology combined with some dietitians that we could offer at scale through digital apps and the supplements personalized to each body. That was very expensive to deliver to ultimately a small audience. So that was a situation where the company pivoted into some other opportunities that we uncovered as we were going through this, but it's still a bit disappointing, to be honest, because it's really powerful, the promise of personalization and getting people what they really, really need from a nutrient standpoint. This just hasn't come to fruition despite all the forecasts over the last decade because of those challenges. People don't really see the value in personalization, and it's very expensive to deliver today.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated. I actually would have placed my bet as well in
Yeah.
the inverse to that, which would make a lot of sense. And there's so many things that we all do in our personal care kind of routine that feels very
Mm-hmm.
specific and unique to what we each need. So very surprising. And I'm curious in that experience, which is a great one, because you mentioned in there at some point there was the acknowledgement and then the pivot based on learnings. I've been in these situations where you're working on something, you're like, this is gonna work. This has gotta work. This has gotta work. And then it's like, okay, let me take a step back. Is this the way that it's gonna work? What was the inflection point for you and the team? And you know what? We've reached this point now. We need to pivot to go down a different path.
It's hard to point to a single inflection point. I'd say we were limited just in launch by the claims that we could make because you had to have a minimum amount of any ingredient in order to make the claims. We weren't even able to really launch with that much personalization in the product itself, which was what people wanted. And so we could offer personalization in terms of the digital experience and certainly the diagnostics to help people understand their body. But the first brand that we launched, you either took one or two pills. That was the level of personalization. And you could consult with a dietitian to understand the right level for yourself. We offered a 2-pack diagnostic, so you could take measurements before you started taking the product, and then 2 or 3 weeks later. The first kind of roadblock was the ability to make the claims that would sell the product while also personalizing the dosage to different people. And then, as with many startups, you have a network of people who are watching what you're doing and you're constantly talking to other leaders in the space. And we started recognizing demand from partners who saw what we had built already, just in terms of the capabilities and the team that we had, and wanted to tap into that. So that's where we started kind of leaning into where there was some demand, and it was more from partnerships. Customers who had just raised a Series A, kind of that earlier stage, and needed more sophisticated technical capability that we had built out. And so we would work for a combination of equity and cash to help up level their digital experience, if that was website or direct connection to dietitians, which was a big part of our technology stack. And we also caught the attention of some larger CPG companies that appreciated the rapid startup innovation cycle, coming up with new products. And so we kind of started running towards where we were seeing more demand, since it wasn't as much on the consumer side.
Got it. I would love, any perspective that you can offer in keeping the end consumer or stakeholder or partner at the center and delivering an exceptional experience amongst a lot of moving pieces. So whether that's in the industry and the channels, what are some of the kind of tried and true things that you lean on to deliver whichever path in terms of the experience that you've built, for the end consumer?
To better understand if it's working?
Yeah, or even, doing the things that allow you to maintain a level of control, brand integrity, to deliver the promise that you've made to the end consumer, even if a lot of things are kind of throwing you for a loop and getting in the way of delivering that promise. Are there any like one or two things that you like, this is what I stay tried and true to in that kind of brand building and consumer experience efforts?
Yeah, my mind's going straight to price, because price should be your last lever in terms of your brand. Yeah, just your perception. It can be a downward spiral, and once you get on marketplaces, you feel a lot of pressure on price. When you're direct to consumer and you have your e-commerce site, there's no competition. There's competition on Facebook or Google where you're advertising, but once you get them to your site and they actually see your price, it's harder to compare easily. Marketplaces are a completely different story. And so I see this a lot actually with e-commerce focused businesses trying and often failing to launch on Amazon or on Walmart.com because there's so much marketplace challenge. So price is that place where you feel a lot of pressure, but it should be the last place that you go. And so I'd say that's kind of the place where I try to keep as pure as possible. Like that's the last place that you should make changes. And it should only be if you really can't make any differentiating claims or have any real form of differentiation. So looking for social proof and people who've used your product and maybe they used a diagnostic and they have tools to show this one really worked better, do some comparison, those grids, us versus them, all of those things, trying to make that premium pricing. Because yeah, once you start reducing your price and going down, it's hard to go back up again.
Yeah. It's great perspective. You've shared really interesting reminders for me that paying attention to signals, moving quickly in any effort on keeping the end kind of demand signals front and center and making your moves. if you had to leave our guests and our community members with one or two pieces of advice, like something that folks can act on that you would,
Yeah.
recommend to keep top of mind.
Well, a really tactical one, when you have the opportunity to launch a new product on Amazon, even if it's, I believe, just a new variation of a product, enroll in the Vine program. That's like, I think, pretty obvious, like a Captain Obvious recommendation.
No, it's a good one.
But you
Absolutely.
get one shot to get early consumer reviews by offering your product to the Vine community. Amazon's pretty strict about when you can do that. And if you've already been listed on Amazon, if your product's already been listed on Amazon for a certain period of time, you don't qualify. So new items, always Vine. Super,
Yes.
super tactical. And then going back to the earlier example, I'd say the other suggestion is really be thoughtful about your distribution channels and the potential conflicts. So as kind of more traditional marketing, we were very conscious of any launch we had on Costco. That's a great example where you launch in Costco, you almost never launch with your exact same SKU and price configuration that you have in other channels. Should treat Amazon and Walmart.com the same way, to be honest, because these tools now can scrape websites and immediately surface differences in price, and increasingly they're doing that on a per count basis. So just in our situation where we changed slightly different count, but it was still a different price per count, that still left us exposed because these crawlers are just getting more and more sophisticated. So having different SKUs, different counts of SKUs, just kind of different product and pack configurations by channel, just like we've always done with Costco, is a really important thing to think about in advance. Once you get that good news about new distribution, immediately move to your plan that hopefully you've already developed around launching a different SKU.
I love that. And actually, yeah, I think it's a great parallel to use. And I've never thought about it that way, but you're so right. In the online marketplace, open marketplace where pricing is dynamic, and thinking of it like club,
Mhm.
and strategizing as it's the lowest price per whatever the unit is, which I've felt that pain many, many, many times.
Yes.
And you're right. It's hard to go back. So it's a great one. And also, at the end of the day, having consumers back your brand, your experience is like mission number one when you're putting yourself out there. So thank you for those pieces of advice. And also for sharing your experiences across a couple of different avenues that you've had in your career. And just really, really appreciate you sharing your perspective, and also feeding help our community.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. It's always hard to talk about the battle scars, but
Yes, but you always navigate them like a champ. So thank you for sharing some of the real with us, which is so important for all of us to learn and get better, in this kind of dynamic world of digital commerce.